After her, the next is you, and this time no one will escape. This was how the message started to hammer in Ricardo's mind as he set his phone on the table, trying to rid himself of those disturbing words. Maria's voice didn't evoke fond memories. It was a cry of desperation, a warning reverberating in every corner of his mind. That night, when everything seemed normal, was shattered by an oath. She didn't die by chance. She fled after hearing her own in-laws plotting the next step of a sinister plan. Death, accident, silence, and now he was the target. The memory of that call saturated every thought. Each of her words was relentless like a sharp blade. Ricardo had prepared for everything. He always believed that danger in the corporate world came from the outside. But there, within his own family circle, betrayal lurked behind laughter and empty promises. What should have been support now revealed itself as a threat, and in this new reality, he knew he had to act. Maria had saved his life by disappearing. What he didn't fully grasp was that, in doing so, she had given him the only chance to change the game. The distrust cultivated over the years was now fueling an unwavering quest for the truth. The faces of his brothers, once warmly familiar, now wore masks of hypocrisy. Mauricio, one of the accomplices, maintained an air of calm and control, but the shadow of his guilt was on the verge of unraveling. The following days spiraled downwards. Ricardo, with the determination of a man who could no longer afford ignorance, dove into investigations. He orchestrated his search like a military strategist. Documents flew across the table, printouts and notes covered the floor. Names emerged in reports that intertwined. Front companies, murky transfers, a carefully woven network to conceal 15 million in embezzlement. And the path, growing clearer, led to Mauricio and his cohorts. Ricardo felt adrenaline coursing through every fiber of his being. He wasn't merely dealing with a corruption scheme. He was confronting an attack on his own family. Intimacy turned into a deadly trap. For someone surrounded by so many lies, trust was a relic on the verge of extinction. When Mauricio entered the office, it was as if the temperature in the room plummeted. His smile echoed a betrayal that Ricardo could no longer ignore. The way he conducted business, carefully avoiding what had become an exposed wound, only intensified feelings of rage and treachery. "Everything is under control," Mauricio said, dismissing an invisible tension. He had no idea what Ricardo had uncovered. The papers hidden in the drawer to his left were ocular proof, witnesses to the truth he was about to unveil. But Ricardo wouldn't confront him just yet. He knew that as long as he kept Mauricio engaged and carefree, more information could surface. And like a patient predator, he began to slowly count the minutes until the clock would do what he hoped: allow the enemy to expose himself. If you're watching the game turn, subscribe to No Mercy Badge and hit the like button now. The anticipation weighed like lead, and each step he took put more distance between him and the familial betrayal that surrounded him. The courtroom where the truth would unfold wasn't just a physical space. It was the arena where a battle for the survival of his family's integrity would take place. And he was ready, because Ricardo knew this story wouldn't end in silence. When the day finally arrived, the room was packed. Important figures mingled with curious onlookers. In the center, Ricardo stood up, and in that instant, burdened by the weight of truth, he raised the documents, each one a blow to Mauricio's armor. He hadn't anticipated the climax. He simply felt he was about to deliver a strike that would change everything, and that only made his heart race faster. If the echoes of betrayal finally surfaced, what would remain of his family? The longing for better days, the need to reclaim what was lost. There were no guarantees, but one thing was certain. The past was about to unfold, and the battle was just beginning. The air in the courtroom felt thick, as if hope and despair were locked in combat. Ricardo took a deep breath, steady steps, as he moved toward the judge. Eyes were fixed on him, some anxious, others skeptical. He couldn't afford to fail. Those documents, records revealing the rot lying beneath the surface of the family, were his only lifeline. Each paper unfolded in his hands like scars from wounds still raw. $15 million siphoned off through shell companies, hidden accounts, a labyrinth of betrayal meticulously crafted by those who should have been his allies. He glanced at Mauricio, seated in the defendant's chair. The brother appeared calm, but all Ricardo could see was the hidden despair behind that flawless facade. The cards were on the table. The truth was revealing itself unabashedly. "Look at this," he began, steadying his voice. The words flew from him like arrows. Companies in the Virgin Islands, accounts leading straight to you, false data, sham contracts. What else have you concealed? The room fell silent, the weight of the revelations crushing any hope of defense. Mauricio, who had seemed unshakable until that moment, swallowed hard. Ricardo sensed the crack, the first of many. "And why, Mauricio? Why did you succumb to this?" The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade. The brother turned his gaze away, the mask of confidence beginning to fracture. Ricardo pressed on. "Maria lived in fear, and you know that. She fled, manipulated an accident to save her own life, the life of our nephew, and all of this because you plotted. You and yours." He held up a particular document, one that illustrated the connection between the brothers and the illicit transactions. The room seemed to spin around him. Murmurs grew louder. There was a scent of blood, even without a physical blow. Minutes stretched into hours. The jurors wore impassive faces, but Ricardo could feel his determination starting to melt the ice of inertia. He pointed at Mauricio, who was visibly uneasy. "This is no longer just a power play. Lives are at stake. And you, Mauricio, you epitomize betrayal. And this betrayal began with our own family." Mauricio finally reacted. His eyes darkened, arms crossed, but fear flickered in his gaze. He hadn't envisioned Ricardo becoming this man, the brother who had always been marginalized, the shadow of the powerful Mauricio. "You don't know what you're talking about," he murmured, but his voice betrayed a tremor he could not hide. "The day you chose this path, you turned me into an adversary," Ricardo shot back. The courtroom was ablaze with tension, and then the unexpected. Mauricio suddenly stood up, pulling out a gun, his movements quick and frantic. The room erupted into chaos. Shouts, heavy and frantic, mingled with the sound of a chair crashing. Ricardo froze. Time stood still. There was only that moment, raw reality laid bare before him. The brother who had been his greatest rival was now a lethal threat. The security team acted swiftly, yet that fraction of a second was enough for adrenaline to surge through his veins. What unfolded in his mind was a journey back to the past. Childhood, carefree smiles, the notion that family meant safety. With a quick motion, the agent subdued Mauricio, the desperation in his eyes crystallizing the truth. He had been defeated at his own game. The ensuing silence was deafening. The collective fear that washed over the room reminded everyone that behind the courtroom walls lay even darker truths. Each person wrestled with their own internal struggle, every juror reflecting on the betrayal of trust. Even Ricardo found himself grappling with a bitter realization. The fragility of the trust they once shared had evaporated like a passing shadow. Deep down, he understood that he would not have an unscathed home to return to afterward. Family had become a shattered concept. What remained were fragments, and the fight for truth led to a strange certainty. Sometimes destruction precedes true salvation. In this maze of lies, he would become the light illuminating the path, even if it meant walking through the ruins of what was once his home. The courtroom reverberated with murmurs and stifled sighs. The tension hung thick in the air. Ricardo felt his heart pound like a war drum. each beat bringing forth memories of a past now marred and distant. He looked at his brothers, sitting across from him, as if they were strangers. Their faces, a blend of disdain and scorn, couldn't mask the underlying fear. After all, the walls listened, and the ground absorbed the truth. Mauricio, the eldest and always the leader, struggled to maintain a facade of calm. However, the sweat on his brow betrayed his composure. Ricardo didn't need to give him a threatening glance. It was enough to release any evidence that fell into his hands. He possessed an ever-growing collection of documents that multiplied lies like a virus. Each statement was a dagger, each revealing a new layer of familial betrayal. With every new paper Ricardo presented, he could sense the ground opening beneath Mauricio's feet. The raw and direct wordplay began to dismantle the cold facade he had constructed. 12 million, he declared loudly, diverted to an offshore account. What do you have to say about that? The silence, stretched, broken only by Mauricio's harsh breathing. The tension in the air was almost palpable. The ticking of the pen marking the time seemed to mock the illusions he had nurtured for years. But it wasn't just the money that weighed heavily. Ricardo was acutely aware of what else was at stake. His young son, the life he had built. The desire to protect his family had always been his priority. The brothers, those who should have stood by him, had betrayed that trust, trading blood ties for a handful of bills. This isn't just a fight for money, it's a fight for justice, he thought, as adrenaline surged through him. The truth was a sharp blade, cutting through corruption and hypocrisy. Do you think you can get away with this? Ricardo's tone escalated, fiery. Do you believe your power is stronger than the law? This is your final play. The audience seemed to absorb every word. He noticed familiar faces in the crowd, friends and supporters, but most importantly, he felt the weight of hope. Maria might be listening, perhaps even rooting for him. There was an unshakable certainty within him. Even if he lost everything, he could not lose the fight. And when Mauricio finally broke the silence, his words were laced with indignation and a sense of victimhood. You don't understand, Ricardo. This money supports the family. You never truly cared. The real irony lay in the fact that he was doing precisely what Ricardo feared, turning the betrayal into a justification, a defense of his actions. Family. You've forgotten what that truly means, haven't you? Ricardo's voice rang out with firmness, even as anger threatened to erupt. You can't build on lies without the whole structure collapsing. As the argument intensified, the judge made a sudden motion. The sound of the gavel echoed, demanding order and silence. Yet Mauricio's words had already been cast into the air. There was no turning back for him. What Ricardo didn't know was that Mauricio held one last card. Hidden trump that would emerge in a desperate bid to salvage what remained. Panic was rising. Ricardo sensed that the night was far from over. One last surge of emotion surged forth, as daunting as it was liberating. In those moments, the air felt thick, heavy with a blend of anticipation and dread. The audience held their breath, and the world around them blurred. The tension hung like a fragile thread. Then, Mauricio stood up. His hand trembled, yet his resolve was firm. What was about to unfold was not merely a man standing up, but the last bastion of a crumbling structure. You will never imprison me, he declared, clutching a piece of paper in his hand. The movement was swift, almost a split second, yet time seemed to unravel before the gravity of the gesture. However, that paper was not a letter revealing new truths. It was a weapon. The scream that followed was deafening. The courtroom transformed into a battlefield as people shouted and ran in chaos. Amid the turmoil, a vigilant police officer managed to neutralize the threat before horror could fully materialize. The fast-paced scene, almost surreal, erupted into a whirlwind of movement and despair, a grotesque portrayal of what greed and betrayal can unleash. And in the struggle for truth, Life began to resonate as a tragic irony. As he was taken away, Mauricio shot a look filled with hatred and desperation. Ricardo stood frozen. Each second burned like a short circuit. The truth would not only have to prevail, but also carry out the necessary destruction. He felt devastated yet resolute. That battle would not end there. The true conflict had only just begun. The turmoil in the courtroom gradually faded, but the atmosphere remained thick with tension. Whispers still echoed, as if the reverberations of betrayal would not be silenced. Ricardo stood, eyes fixed on the door through which Mauricio had been taken into custody. The clock on the wall seemed to tick slowly, a cruel reminder of the reality that still awaited him. The security of trust had shattered, and the impact resonated within him. A court official approached. The cautious gaze of the man conveyed a mix of empathy and fear. "Sir, Ms. Maria must be worried," he said, breaking the tense silence surrounding Ricardo. It was true. He left the room, seeking fresh air outside that stifling place. The scent of burnt paper from the stress lingered in the air, mingling with his own anxiety. Maria, now out of the shadows, represented a beacon of hope, yet the harsh reality loomed large. The financial struggle was a battlefield, but the emotional sentence was a silent Armageddon. What would happen when she found out? When the wounds of betrayal with the brothers resurfaced? That conversation in the stillness of the night still echoed in his mind. No witnesses. He had been a thorn in their plan. But what did that mean for their child? In the courthouse garage, Ricardo spotted Maria's car. The engine growled, and he could almost feel her desperation, as if the very air particles were electric, charged with an impatience that consumed him. He had to find her. Without a second thought, he jumped into the car and sped toward her house. The tire slid slightly on the turn, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The speed did little to alleviate his sense of vulnerability. He arrived, breathless, his keys trembling in hand. Each step down the corridor felt like a warning. Be careful. Yet, the house was empty, silent. Echoes of the past seemed to whisper through the walls. The scent of vanilla lingered in the kitchen, a remnant of a meal prepared with love. Everything felt cinematic, as if he were about to witness the final scene of a film, but he didn't want to be just a spectator. The back door creaked open slowly. Maria entered, her face weary. A meeting of their gazes carried more meaning than words could convey. She sensed the intensity of the battle he had fought, and the aftermath extended beyond the courtroom. "What happened? I heard gunshots on the news." Her trembling voice betrayed her fear. Ricardo took a deep breath. "They will pay, Maria. The truth is coming, but there's no turning back. What they did, it's far worse than I expected." He felt exposed. The weight of his words fluctuated between accusation and a call to resist. As he spoke, he realized it wasn't just about justice. It was about emotional survival. She shook her head, and he noticed a tear slide down her cheek. "And what will become of us, now that the veil has been lifted? Who are we really?" The insecurity in her voice echoed Ricardo's own dilemmas. He had no answer, only one certainty: the rebuilding would be more painful than the destruction. Then a phone rang. The alarming sound sliced through the heavy air. "It's about the scheme. They are desperate, Maria." What started as a family discussion was now turning into a minefield. He wanted to protect his child, and the pressure of knowing there was more at stake consumed him. The scheme and their family ties intertwined inextricably, and Ricardo realized each revelation cast deeper shadows over his life. At that moment, the phone vibrated urgently. Messages, calls. He hesitated, but the need to stay a step ahead was imperative. "It could be important," he announced, trying to keep his tone neutral. Maria, still shaken, stepped back to create some space. Silence enveloped them once more. The revelations came fast, like a shipwreck. The brothers were still in the game, Mauricio had allies who wouldn't hesitate to act. Each word typed on the screen was another blow, a new piece on the board that fueled paranoia. "Remember, Maria, they won't give up. Every move counts," Ricardo explained, the weight of certainty crushing his hopes for safety. The night would stretch long. They would be forced to face a truth they never planned for. What was once a home now felt like a labyrinth of betrayal and survival. The emptiness of what once felt secure filled the air between them. Deep down, they understood that the fight for their family life was just beginning. Ricardo surveyed the courtroom walls. The tall windows, framed by heavy curtains, filtered daylight into dull, almost funereal rays. The scent of polished wood mingled with the aroma of coffee cooling in forgotten cups. He felt every second slip through his fingers like sand in an hourglass. The room remained a battlefield, the jurors' faces stiff, as if their souls were for sale. Hope beat in his chest like a drum of anxiety. Mauricio remained at the forefront. The coldness in his brother's eyes was palpable, as if he knew that every word Ricardo uttered could turn into another trap. The weight of the pressure on Ricardo was oppressive. He stood up, heart racing, and began to recount the chains of corruption that ensnared his family. He spoke of companies lurking in the shadows, fictitious names that vanished from official documents but whispered through the hallways of irregular transactions. Cloaked in disbelief, the story sprang to life through Ricardo's words. Evidence sprawled across the table, resembling a puzzle that required scrutiny of each revealed piece. That solemn labor intertwined with the clang of truth. Every bank statement, every forged signature was more than just paper. It was memory. It echoed the family discussions that had now morphed into echoes of betrayal. And who could have imagined? Who would suspect? The treachery hidden beneath the family roof. The notion of home twisted, sinking into the murky waters of distrust. Mauricio's gaze hardened. Something far more sinister was at play. It was not merely about money. It was about power. In that setting, morality had become a currency that had lost its worth. Ricardo spoke, yet felt the pressure mounting. The manipulation of the mind, subtle and unyielding, danced in the expressions of the jurors, blind to the evident truth. A mere nod, a slight motion from that group who decided who would be absolved and who condemned could shift everything. The strain was visible in the sweat trickling down some people's temples. Suddenly, the sound of a chair scraping made the air tremble. Mauricio rose, his eyes unwavering, lips twisted into a grotesque smile. It was merely a facade. With one last defiant glance, he realized he held the room in his grasp. At that moment, Ricardo noticed shadows shifting in the background. The tension hung thick, heavy, and there was no turning back. The brother, so near yet so far, resembled a cornered animal trapped with no escape. And then, like a flash of lightning cleaving the sky, the unthinkable happened. The act of desperation immortalized itself as Mauricio drew the weapon. The clamor of metal against tile echoed like a piercing scream, but what began as a strike against the familial heart spiraled into frantic action. The room morphed into a battlefield. Witnesses' screams melded with officers' commands. Chaos reverberated as Ricardo battled the surge of adrenaline. Yet the true struggle lay beyond what the eyes could perceive. Familiar faces transformed into masks of strangeness, remnants of a past that now felt alien. Everything moved rapidly while the outside world unfolded in revealing silences, a frantic testament to how families can become shackles in someone's grasp. Amidst the turmoil and despair, the line between friend and foe blurred. Am I a brother or your executioner? After the mayhem, Ricardo's eyes locked onto those of a juror. That connection transcended the barriers of fear and mistrust, and for a moment, he felt understood. On the way to prison, the brothers were led, still making a final stand to preserve what little honor remained. But truth is a shadow that does not dissipate, and the light had finally exposed the darkness. Ricardo realized that it was not just his child's safety at stake. It was a testament a lesson amidst the mists of history. Home had turned into a battlefield, and those who survived could not forget the path they had traversed. When the court doors closed, hope still had a chance. Yet Ricardo knew that despite everything, what remained was no longer a home. It was a reconstruction. Now it was merely fragmented memories of a past that the future would never fully revive. The courtroom began to empty, yet the pressure in Ricardo's chest only intensified. He had transformed into a relentless machine, each piece of evidence in his hand morphing into fuel for his unwavering pursuit. The brothers, once trusted family members, were now distorted shadows in his memories. Mauricio's cold demeanor still made him nauseous. That man who always appeared so confident was now cornered, and desperation pulsed in his eyes. However, the investigation showed no signs of stopping. With each document, a new path emerged. The transfers weren't random, they were executed with surgical precision, as if rehearsed. Down to the last detail. Ricardo pondered where the gap lay. From there, with every discovery, more questions arose. How had they come this far? The familiar had turned into a stranger, and betrayal became a poison. For him, it was a deadly game. How to expose his own blood without tarnishing what little remained of his family. Nights stretched long and sleepless. He immersed himself in the details, diving deep into spreadsheets and charts. The scent of fresh coffee filled the room as he scrutinized each line. There was something undeniable about the hidden accounts. The millions that had vanished began to form a portrait of guilt and infidelity. What troubled him the most was the certainty that, at the end of the night, it was always he who was awake, always the last one standing. And amidst the obsession, a flicker of hope ignited. A new witness willing to speak, a discreet source within the circle. The fear of repercussions was tangible, but who had made the choice to ally? With Ricardo. The game was starting to unfold like a chess match. Every move needed to be calculated, every action deliberate. Mauricio, still self-assured, seemed taken aback by the resolve Ricardo displayed. To him, the younger brother was merely a pawn in a larger game. A meeting in a vacant cafe, light filtered through the windows at almost dramatic angles. The smell of mold and coffee mingled like a reminder of bygone days. The contact whispered information that shattered the last barriers. Action was imperative. In that moment, the truth began to solidify into something greater than themselves, than even him. The action plan became clear. Each link in the chain of betrayal had to be laid bare. With the witnesses' help, his evidence expanded like a roaring tide. The following hours dissolved in the pressure of meetings with lawyers and anticipation. In the courtroom, the atmosphere grew nearly unbearable. The sound of shoes striking the floor echoed as he walked with determination. The tension mounted as Ricardo approached the final phase of his accusation. Like a gladiator about to enter the arena, he felt adrenaline coursing through his veins. He recalled Maria's call. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not this time. The evidence was assembled strategically. A high-stakes game of cards laid out on the table. Everything at risk. The room was filled with spectators, and the atmosphere crackled with a dense, almost tangible electricity. Each document presented was a frontal assault. Mauricio's nervousness was undeniable. The audience's gazes mirrored the tension and expectation. Yali stepped forward, challenging the very essence of their experience. If those around them knew the truth, if the shadowy financial maneuvers were exposed, the scandal would become an unstoppable storm. When Ricardo finally concluded his presentation, the courtroom seemed on the verge of eruption. Under the weight of scrutinizing stares, Mauricio did the unthinkable. In a moment of defensive heat, he drew a weapon, a desperate act that caused a collective gasp. The world crumbled in mere moments. A scattering crowd screams a chaotic dance, but in a split second, security sprang into action. Shouts, a duet of vulnerability and power. Mauricio, utterly astonished by his own actions, was subdued. The audience swiftly led to a conviction. The brothers, ignited by the flames of betrayal, became the villains of this tale, and the financial scheme crumbled in layers. Thus, the chains binding Maria and her child shattered. Yet, even with the freedom this would bring, the reality that trust would never be fully restored loomed like a shadow. Ricardo understood that the path to rebuilding would be grueling. In the darkness that followed, he couldn't shake the feeling of lost illusions. Reconstructing the notion of home would be a monumental task, with no guarantee of success. As he watched the courtroom door close, it became evident that the future would demand a sacrifice, a destruction of what had been to embrace what could be. Finally, he grasped that the fight for family often turns into a duel against one's own ghosts. The hours dragged as the court emptied, yet Ricardo's unease did not wane. With every step toward the exit, the weight of betrayal lingered like a shadow. The echoes of broken promises whispered in his ears. He recalled how everything had seemed perfect, a facade of loyalty built on lies. Now, it was all crumbling. Familiar faces, once confident and joyful, transformed into mere masks of hypocrisy. How could he rebuild what lay in ruins, hopes shattered with every passing moment? He wondered if Maria could trust again, if her child could thrive in a safe environment. Ricardo felt that the struggle extended beyond unraveling financial crimes or punishing the guilty. It was a fight for a future unburdened by distrust, a future where family ties did not equate to pain and betrayal. As he walked down the street, a cold breeze sliced through the lingering warmth of the day. The scent of rain-soaked asphalt reminded him that life moved on, even as everything he knew had changed. With each step, a thought solidified in his mind: the necessity to distance himself from that suffocating past. But how? How to leave behind the image of brothers who had once been friends, accomplices? The desire for revenge intertwined with the responsibility of being a father, and this duality tormented him. Ricardo needed to grasp the invisible details that had led to this collapse. Thus, he returned to the documents, the hidden accounts, every transfer he had tracked. It wasn't merely obsession. It was an act to calm the storm brewing within him. He would sit for hours in the darkness of the office, surrounded by papers, a cup of cold coffee beside him. Graphs merged with numbers, each line drawn on the small screen resembling a map to escape. The frantic rhythm of typing seemed to sync with his racing pulse. Still, there was an emptiness, and he knew that remaining trapped in this cycle would be a death sentence in itself. Ricardo needed a purpose that didn't solely rest on his frustrations. What if Maria returned? What if trust could slowly be rebuilt? Thoughts swirled like a gentle murmur in his mind. The image of his child, innocent and carefree, echoed like a call for salvation. That child bore no blame for the betrayals. The future should be for him, not an extension of past. Shadows. In that moment of clarity, an idea formed. Ricardo resolved that even amid chaos, he could redefine the meaning of family, not as a return to what was lost, but as the creation of something entirely new. Each interaction with Maria, every conversation, each small step toward a new reality would be an opportunity to restore the trust that had faded away. And he vowed to himself not to let the lessons learned from pain be buried beneath the weight of resentment. Ricardo had forged a new way to confront the wounds. He wanted Maria to feel that she wouldn't have to hide again, that life could take a different turn, and most importantly, that reconciliation was not just a possibility, but a vital necessity. The journey ahead would be long, filled with obstacles and painful memories, yet he was resolute to tread this path. The palace of lies had crumbled, and beneath its ruins, a new foundation could rise, one that would not only support the family, but also strengthen it. As he observed the dim light filtering through the windows of his office, Ricardo realized the struggle was far from over. He was fighting not just for the truth, but for his son's freedom and a space where renewal could blossom. It was a battle demanding the courage to embrace what was most credible and confront what should not exist. Amidst this process of renewal, even when everything seemed impossible, a spark of hope began to flicker in the darkness. The courtroom now lay in complete silence. Ricardo, standing firm, took a deep breath, despite the air being thick with the scent of despair and betrayal. Mauricio, there in his helplessness, had bulging eyes, resembling burnt-out light bulbs, hinting at an impending fate. The tension loomed like a storm ready to break. The decisive moment was approaching, and the judge was preparing to announce the verdict. But Ricardo was not merely waiting. He was stripping away the raw and naked reality, exposing the brutality hidden beneath the surface of an empire built on lies. Every document he presented was a warning cry, each piece of evidence a thud against the fragile ground of family. As the judge uttered the final words, "Guilty," echoing throughout the room, it felt as if the stale air of the courtroom had been sliced by lightning. The relief nearly overwhelmed him. Yet looking at Mauricio, trapped in denial, Ricardo felt a mix of joy and revulsion. The man who had hidden behind the guise of a loving brother was now a monster, a traitor to his own flesh. What was once protection had morphed into a deadly trap, turning the family into a battlefield. The turmoil of the decision was not celebrated. Rather, it deepened the rift. Ricardo turned, seeking the exit. The fresh air outside felt like a blessing, but the city he once knew had transformed. The pungent smell of corruption lingered, reminding him that the road to truth often leaves deep wounds. As he walked those streets, he thought of Maria, her courage to step away, and the desperation that had driven her to forge a new life. He recalled the warning he had received. Sometimes saving the family means destroying everything it once was. The weight of that statement felt heavier than ever. Yes, he had won a battle, but the war still raged in the background. Trust, innocence, all lay in ruins. What Ricardo couldn't dismiss was that the lion still roamed free in the family savannah. Freedom now seemed more like a facade than a triumph, and his son's future still hung in the balance of uncertainty. What remained of him, the Ricardo who had entered defenseless, was now a man shaped by pain and betrayal. Yet, it was not just that. Hope, too, was emerging like a slender thread against the fog. A new life was possible, but this life would demand not just courage, but a re-evaluation of what it meant to be a father amidst chaos. With his mind swirling in thoughts, he made a decision. No more games. He would take control, not only for the truth, but for his son's protection. It was time to rebuild, not just from scratch, but from the very rubble. Looking out the office window, he allowed himself to be captivated by the daylight streaming in more intensely than ever before. What had once been darkness could now mark the beginning of a new foundation. Life could resonate like a realm called hope. Thus, amidst pain and resolve, Ricardo felt the urge to fight not just for protection, but for a space where the roots of trust could re-establish themselves. And so, as he took his first steps towards a future that might be radiant, he reminded himself of what he had always told others. Free yourself from the lies, embrace the truth, and that's where transformation begins. And if this turning point has sparked something within you, then subscribe now to No Mercy Badge and hit the notification bell. Give a thumbs up if this story truly resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and let me know in the comments. Would you have the courage to rebuild everything after so much pain? Or would you give up along the way? And now, on your screen, 2 more videos are appearing. Click to watch now and continue this journey.